The first thing I just want to clarify is that when we present our crime statistics, we try to compare like with like. So we've changed it for a few years, but I sometimes get the same question. So we're comparing the first 6 months of 2014 with the first 6 months of 2013. We're not comparing month to month, and we're not comparing quarter to quarter because the time period is too short to get any sort of full picture out of that. So having said that, what I can report is that the current crime picture in Bermuda is actually showing very positive trends. The second quarter of 2014 is actually the lowest on record at 750 offenses across all categories. Total crime fell below 800 for the first time since modern crime recording systems were established in 2000. When we compare the first 6 months of 2014 against the same period last year, 137 fewer crimes were reported. That's 1,649 against 1,786, and that calculates to a reduction of about 7.5%. Notable reductions are included throughout the crime report, including firearms incidents that fell from 12 to 5. Shooting fatalities dropped from 2 to 1. And shooting injuries dropped from 4 in 2013 to 2 in 2014. 92 fewer serious and other assaults were recorded for a 32% reduction overall on assaults. Criminal damage fell by 17% to 113 complaints. Total burglaries fell by 12%, and residential burglaries by themselves fell by 9%, and there were no burglaries reported at any of the island's tourist accommodations in the first 6 months of 2014. Unfortunately, a significant increase in motor vehicle theft spoils the overall downward crime trend. It rose from 307 thefts in 2013 to 429 in 2014, and that's an increase of almost 40%. $1.7 million worth of illegal drugs have been seized so far this year, with the bulk of that number being interdicted by the Customs Department at the ports of entry. Now, it's important for me to pause here and note that these results were not achieved by the police alone. You'll remember a few years ago I stood here when the crime rates, particularly violent crime rates, were significantly higher than they are now. And I made the point then that the police could not solve the serious crime problem and the gang problem specifically by ourselves. And I suggested then crime is a community problem that requires community solutions. So it stands to reason that when crime rates fall, the police cannot take the credit by themselves either. And I believe that Bermuda is seeing the results of the last 4 years of better joined up efforts between police, community, and government. Crime reduction hasn't come about just because of better law enforcement. It's because of more community involvement and increased coordination across government agencies and departments. We've all been working at this now for about 4 years or more, and I really think that is something for Bermuda to be very proud of. Unfortunately, despite the good news that the crime report brings in terms of overall reductions in crime, there are still some very worrying signs on the traffic report. While there are 141 fewer collisions than the same period in 2013, we still recorded 726 collisions in the first 6 months of this year. That equates to 4 collisions a day, and that is only marginally better than 5 per day that was recorded last year. More disturbing is the number of road traffic fatalities. To date, Bermuda has recorded 9 fatalities. My deepest sympathies are extended to all families and friends that are affected by road deaths, including those of the latest victim, Mr. Melvin Smith, who died this week under the most tragic circumstances. That means Bermuda has already reached about the same number of total fatal collisions that were recorded in each of the last 3 years, but we still have 5 months left to go in 2014. So we've looked very carefully at the data, which I can tell you is quite startling. Since 2008, which is a period of about 6.5 years, 25 murders in Bermuda have been attributed to gang violence and firearms. But in the same period, 80 deaths have occurred on our roads. With a ratio of more than 3 to 1, the situation demands that Bermuda addresses this problem. In the same way that we developed our gang strategy in 2010 to tackle the spike in violence, our head of the Roads Policing Unit, Inspector Robert Cardwell, is putting the finishing touches on a new road safety strategy. The strategy has 2 fundamental goals: to save lives and to make our roads safer. In the same manner of the gang strategy, we will endorse a community-wide effort towards road safety that combines robust law enforcement with equally robust education, prevention, and rehabilitation programs. We must calm down our roads before more lives are lost. I hope to be able to release the strategy in the coming weeks. In the meantime, the BPS encourages all road users to slow down and drive with care, caution, and courtesy. And I'd like to remind you that road safety is everyone's responsibility. Thank you.
Are there any questions at this time?
Commissioner,
Yes.
do you think when legislation changed to bring these high-powered bikes on the road maybe 5 years ago, do you think that was a bad move? Because you said within the last 3 years, there have been about 80 persons died on the road.
Last 6.5 years. Yeah, there's
Do you
been
think
80.
it's a contributing factor is these high-powered bikes?
I think the answer is there are many things that contribute to it. And if we roll the clock back, I had the same pitch in 2010. Gang violence didn't just erupt because of a single event. There were multiple pressures that created that problem, which meant that there had to be solutions that had multiple angles to them. And I think that's the same thing with road safety. There's no one single thing. It's not just the vehicles. It's not just the road design. It's not just the congestion. It's not just speed. I think it's a combination of lots of forces that have been unchecked for a number of years that we now need to put into check. But it's the message I think we'd like to stress is it will take the whole community across a full spectrum of different issues that need to be addressed. Not just simply, as we did back in the 70s and 80s, put police officers in the bushes with a radar gun and just book everybody for speeding. That doesn't work.
Commissioner, you mentioned that bike theft and motor vehicle theft is still one of the biggest crimes on the island. Is there any action plan to try and crack down on this? Is there plans for maybe more neighbourhood watches or more CCTV? Or
Well, I suppose neighbourhood watches would be an automatic feature in there. But here's the problem. In January, I reported that 2013 was the lowest crime rate since 2000. And my fear, although that was really good news, my fear is that when crime is relatively low, or very low in that case, there's only one way it can go, back up. So what we're seeing in terms of motor vehicle theft in comparison to 10 years ago is actually still a huge reduction. But if we compare it to last year, it's a significant increase. So I don't say that to marginalize the increase, but I say that just to put it in perspective that we haven't returned to the days where we were recording 13 bikes a day being stolen. Having said that, clearly we use directed patrols in accordance with the data that we get about the bike. So we're looking at the areas, the type of bike, the time of day, and making sure that our patrols are aware of that so we can intervene.
Last question. You said drug interdiction task force has intercepted $1.something million worth of drugs.
1.7.
It's rather low, and the streets are rampant with a lot of drugs. Is the narcotics department, is it low numbers? What is your strategy in that area? Because the streets have a lot of drugs on.
I mean, you'll
Are you
appreciate,
concerned about that?
you'll appreciate that some of that is anecdotal, so that's, what you're repeating is what people talk about as opposed to something measurable.
Okay,
You'll
okay, I'll put it this way.
appreciate that.
There are other means that the smugglers are using to bring drugs in. And it's not just through the airport or through the dock,
Yeah.
through the docks.
Yeah.
They are bringing out, you go on boats and all
Yeah.
sorts of ways. Is your department, the narcotic department, on top of this? Because obviously, it doesn't seem to be.
Well, I mean, first of all, you can't just look at the amount of drugs or the value of drugs, because there's so many variables. If you take a pound of heroin off the street, that's worth millions. If you take a pound of cannabis off the street, that's worth thousands. So you can't just compare raw numbers. We try to stay away from that. I think what we look at is the number of seizures that we make, and in rank order, it's actually backwards. So we look at the number of seizures on the street, but more importantly, the number of seizures at the ports of entry, but more importantly, the number of seizures that are made outside of Bermuda, where we use overseas agencies to interdict the drug before it even gets here, because that's really what we're trying to do. We don't want it to land here and then arrest people. We want to stop it from coming here. The short answer to your question is, drug importation still continues to plague law enforcement agencies because we are an island in the middle of the Atlantic with porous borders, surrounded by an ocean. So it's an importer's dream, and it takes a lot of resources between us and the Customs Department to tackle that. How are we doing? I mean, that's a different question, I suppose, that I can't answer right now. You'd have to look at things like, what the value of drugs are on the street, if they're going up, if they're going down, and measure the number of convictions over a period of time. And I don't have that data in front of me.
Are you satisfied then?
I think we're doing the best we can, yeah. And I think also, Bermuda has to look at the prioritization of the things that cause the most and the most harm and the most immediate harm to the community. And for 4 years, it's taken all of our resources and all of our effort to get in front of the gang problem, which we haven't won. Let's not kid each other here. We haven't stopped gangs, and there will be more shootings, without a doubt. Our job is to suppress that as best we can and bring the offenders to justice. The community continues to work at taking the sting and the heat out of gang tensions, and I think we'll get there eventually. We're not there yet, but we're in a significantly better place than we were in 2010.
Just one question. A number of police officers have been or are out on extended paid sick leave. How many officers are still in that position?
2.
Thank you very much for coming, and we will send out the final.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Just
Chair.
one quick question, sorry. Noticed in the statistics that sexual assaults seem to be going up. Do you think this is more, from speaking to sort of social workers, it seems to be that more are getting reported rather than it being, people are more willing to come forward rather than it being an increase in the actual sort of crime itself?
Well, I think, again, 2 things. You have to look at long-term trends and not compare one quarter to the next. If you look at quarter 2 against quarter 1, there's a significant increase in the number of sexual assaults that have been reported. That in itself does not tell a story because that's a period of 3 months. But I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think the wider issue is that more community resources and more government resources have been brought together to come to bear on support of victims and investigation of offenses. And that by itself is very likely to mean that members of the community are more willing to report crimes than they may have been in the past.
Go ahead. Sorry, Commissioner, just one more question.
Sure.
A number of child molesters, so to speak, have been brought before the courts and are charged with these types of crimes. Is this number alarming to you?
I don't have a comparison in front of me, so I can't answer that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.